Hi, Claudia.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Sent me a list after the bulletin was sent that lists
Oh, okay.
Laura is doing the candle offering,
Oh, I
Pam
am?
is doing Kyrie 1, Claudia Kyrie 2,
Right, I got that. Oops.
A reading from the prophet Isaiah, the 9th chapter. The people who walked in darkness had seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied the nation, you have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, you have broken on as on the day of Midian. His authority shall grow continually, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onwards and forevermore. Holy wisdom, holy word. Thanks
Thanks
be
be
to
to
God.
God. And the gospel is from John, the 8th chapter. Jesus is the light of the world, a light of hope, compassion, and justice.
Early in the morning, Jesus came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away, one by one, beginning with the elders. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go on your way, and from now on, do not sin again." Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." The gospel of the Lord.
Thank you. So, God has great concern for the poor, the sick, the persecuted. We know this from the Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount. It amazes me how often Christians fall into the habit of admiring the accomplishments of the high and mighty, glorifying power and envying wealth, seeing as the world sees. Similarly, Christians fall for the worldly nostalgia for the good old days, or get attached to the status quo that makes them feel so comfortable. Advent is about awaiting a better world, not resisting change, not hearkening back to some golden age. God has great concern for those who are mourning now, who are hungry now, who are excluded now, and lifts up a vision of a new day when those people are no longer excluded, no longer hungry. God lifts up a vision of that new day as good news. Good news for me, good news for you, good news for them. Well, in a world where there is an us and them, good news is for them as well, and maybe especially for them, those who are deemed to be them, the stranger, the other. The people who walked in darkness, who lived in deep darkness. Their yoke is broken. The rod of their oppressor will be broken. We all feel a dreadful time is upon us, but there are others who have it worse. Brene Brown recently interviewed John Meacham, the historian. They're two of my favorite authors. And she asked him, in this pandemic, in this political turmoil of 2020, has it ever been this bad before? And John Meacham's response was, well, if you were Emmett Till in the 1950s, that was worse. That was really bad. And he said, if you were Alice Paul in the 1910s, when she and other suffragettes protested and marched for women to have the right to vote and were arrested because they were speaking for that right, and those women who were arrested and imprisoned were on a hunger strike, that was really bad. That was worse than it is now. So Meacham was pointing out that while we might think, wow, this has never been this bad before, there have been some people in our history who've experienced real oppression and even terror. If you think about the Jim Crow South, if you think about slavery, if you think about the way in which those people were treated. I think that's what we're supposed to think of when we hear about the people who have walked in darkness, the people who have lived in a land of deep darkness. Even on our worst days, we should still be able to hear God call for us to care for the least among us. As we hear from Jesus in Matthew 25, to feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty, to clothe the naked, to welcome the stranger. We should attend to the needs of those who find themselves in the darkest places in our world. You may have seen a movie called Boys Don't Cry, released in 1999. It featured the actor Hilary Swank as a transgender man. It's based on the life and death of Brandon Teena, who was 21 years old in Nebraska when she was exposed as a transgender man and was subsequently violated and killed. We on Sunday morning, whether we're virtual or whether we're here in our church, we have a community that has a lot of different political outlooks, lots of different ways of seeing things in the world. Some of us rejoice at the fact that there's now marriage equality for same-gender couples. Some of us probably grew up in a time when they couldn't conceive of same-gender couples having marriage equality, and maybe some of those people are still unsure of whether they understand it. So I think we have that diversity on Sunday morning, liberals and conservatives and Republicans and Democrats and people of different backgrounds, people who come here from different places. So we have that spectrum, and we love that about our church, that we have that diversity. But I think whether you agree with the idea of marriage equality or not, I think we all agree that if someone is thought to be gay, whether they are gay or not, if they're just thought to be gay, that they should not be facing persecution, that they should not fear for their lives walking down the street. And we know that we live in a society where even in our lifetimes, even in the past decade, people who identify as gay and lesbian are targeted for hate crimes, to be violated, to be killed, to be harassed, to be hurt in really horrible ways oftentimes. So I think whatever we feel about marriage equality or civil rights for gays and lesbians, we probably all would feel like they should not be the victims of crimes. They should not be targeted for violence and for hate because of who they are. Similarly, as I talk about this movie, Boys Don't Cry, if someone identifies as transgender, or if someone identifies as gender fluid or gender nonconforming, so a woman who wants to have short hair and dress in a masculine manner, a man who wants to have long hair, wants to wear a dress, wants to have nails that are longer, wants to present in a more feminine manner. You might not understand that, you might not agree with it, but I think we all agree that that person should not be the subject of attack. And we know that throughout history, people who are gay or people who are transgender have been targeted for violent crimes. And we know that in our country today, there is an increase in attacks on people who are transgender. And there is a real rise in violence against people because they are transgender, being attacked by people. So I think whether we understand that, whether we're brought up to accept that or not, I think we're all beginning to realize now, hopefully, that violence against somebody because of their gender identity, because of their sexual identity, is something we should all be able to speak up against. And I think when we read about people who walk in a land of deep, who live in a land of deep darkness, people who have walked in darkness, we should realize that there are people in our society who find themselves hiding in the shadows, who find themselves hiding for fear because of a culture that does not accept them, and a culture that often tolerates mistreatment and persecution and abuse, that allows people to be violated and to be tortured and to be murdered because of their gender identity, because of their sexual identity. All of us should be able to speak up against this. So as we talk about the LGBT community, just to add to that, if we haven't spoken about it before, if we haven't thought about it before, the T in LGBT is transgender. And there are people who identify as a gender, as a sex different than the way they were born. And that might be a new thing for a lot of us. It might be something that we don't understand or we haven't experienced. But I think we're realizing that when we don't make an effort to understand people who are living in such situations, people who find themselves being targeted because of who they are, when we don't make the effort to understand that, we're allowing injustice to continue. So hear these words today about people who are walking in darkness, and think about our own struggles and our own difficulties, but also realize that there are others who live in darkness, and darkness that has been far worse than ours. Whatever we feel about living in this time of political turmoil, in this time of pandemic, to remember John Meacham's words that, well, if you were Emmett Till in the past, if you were Alice Paul in the past, and if you were someone who is transgender today, you might find yourself not being tolerated, not being accepted, not being allowed to live. And that's something that we should understand. God calls us to care for those people who are persecuted in that way, and that God calls for a day when the rod of their oppressor will be broken, when the yoke of their burden and oppression will be relieved. And that is something that we can all understand as God calling to us to make that world, that to bring that good news to people who need to hear it, and to bring that light to people who need to experience that light.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
From that video, you can see how much our youth have changed since we last saw them. Their voices have changed, everything has changed, and it's kind of sad because we haven't seen them in so long, but I'm really glad that they're getting to do this.
We want to thank everybody who continues to send their donations to the church. We just want to remind you that there are 4 ways that you can continue to send your donations. You could send them by mail, or second, you can instruct your bank to send a check of whatever amount and the frequency of your choice. And the address of the church is 761 King Street, Rye Brook, New York. Thirdly, you could also authorize your bank with a quick pay using Zelle and send this to St. Paul's Evangelical Lutheran Church. The email address is spelch@msn.com. Lastly, you could use Venmo, venmo.com, or the Venmo app on your smartphone, and send it to @St. Paul's Rye Brook, and the name Laura Chen Schultz will appear. And we thank you all for your continued support to St. Paul's.
Bye-bye.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.
Happy Thanksgiving. Yes,
Happy
yes. Happy
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.